Yasmany Tomás was hailed as the next Cuban baseball star when he signed for a costly 6 years, $68.5 million ahead of the 2015 season. But throughout this deal, he couldn't stay healthy, had problems off the field, and spent almost the same amount of games in the minor leagues as the majors. This contract was also a big reason why the club had to let go of JD Martinez, Patrick Corbin, and franchise icon Paul Goldschmidt. But to fully understand this franchise-altering story, we need to go back to where Tomás's career began. Tomás was born in Havana, Cuba, and began playing professional baseball at just 17 years old, but it wasn't until his age 20 season before he started to turn heads. In his 69 games, he managed 30 extra base hits, hit over 300, and had an OPS of 913. And over the next few years, he would continue his dominance in the league as one of the game's best young players. He was happy. In an interview, he even mentioned that it never crossed my mind to come to the United States and play in the major leagues so I could be a millionaire. If it were the best baseball in the world and you didn't get paid millions to play, I would still want to play. We didn't get paid much in Cuba. But the woman he was seeing at the time had managed to acquire a visa to enter the US and was soon leaving the country. Tomás, who didn't want to lose her, decided to follow her to the US, which meant he had to do what every Cuban player that came before him did, that being defect his home country. It wasn't an easy decision to leave behind his loved ones and the place he grew up. However, he knew it would allow him to stay with not only the girl he loved, but also play baseball at the highest possible level. And it wasn't a new occurrence for Cuban players to defect. It started in 1980 when Barbaro Garbi defected and signed with the Detroit Tigers, and a few more were able to make the life-threatening journey over the next few decades. But it wasn't until the early 2010s before teams started to pay attention to Cuba as a source for elite baseball talent. It started with guys like Aroldis Chapman, who signed for 6 years, $30.25 million in 2010, Leonis Martin, who signed the same year for 5 years, $15.5 million, then Yoenis Cespedes in 2012 when he signed for 4 years, $36. And in his first season, he tore the league apart, managing 23 home runs with an .861 OPS, only being bested by Mike Trout in Rookie of the Year voting. So every front office was yearning for the next Cuban star, meaning guys like Yasmany Tomás, Yasmany Castillo, and Jose Abreu all got big deals, leaving Yasmany Tomás to be the next man up, with teams like the San Francisco Giants, Philadelphia Phillies, New York Yankees, and many more lining up to acquire his services, with scouts praising his ability. It's 70 raw power on the 20/80 scale, with a chance to hit 25 plus home runs over a full season, possibly more depending on contact frequency in game situations. The power is evident in batting practice, where he generates loft and over-the-fence power from his pull side over to right center field. But on the other hand, some were not too convinced with his game, stating, "When Tomás last appeared in international competition, he was overweight and looked like a DH while playing center field. He remains a below-average runner with a stiff body. His bat speed is questionable, however, and he might struggle with good velocity, especially since he didn't hit for high averages in Cuba." Despite this, the Arizona Diamondbacks felt confident enough to sign him to a huge 6-year, $68.5 million deal, just a few million shy of the all-time Cuban record Yasmany Castillo inked a couple months prior. But regardless, Tomás was set for lifetimes, and he got to play in the best baseball league in the world. And as for the D-backs, they believed they had their new cornerstone in their franchise, as he immediately slotted in as the most expensive contract on their payroll. But unfortunately, his MLB career was far from storybook. At the time of his acquisition in 2015, the D-backs were on the heels of a last-place finish in the NL West, which included the second lowest attendance in their club's history. It was no doubt a tough position the franchise had found themselves in. Tomás was in a way a step in the right direction. The only problem was they had no idea where he was going to play, because the outfield, his most comfortable position, was occupied by Mark Trumbo in right and David Peralta in left, leaving the club to try out Tomás at third base in spring training, a decision that didn't impress scouts, mentioning, "He was rough around the edges, he bobbled some balls, misplayed others, and at times did not appear to have proper technique." Because of this, the D-backs did not feel as though he was ready to start the 2015 season with a major league roster, and instead optioned him to AAA Reno to get more at-bats and innings in the field. A decision that was short-lived, as he was up less than 2 weeks later on April 14th, making his debut the same day, grounding out in his lone at-bat. Over the next few days, he would continue this trend of pinch hitting, managing his first hit off Gene Machi via a single to right field in his 4th appearance. And on the same day, the D-backs' primary third baseman friend Jake Lamb suffered a stress reaction in his left foot, forcing him to go on the 15-day injured list, meaning Tomás finally had a chance at everyday at-bats. And in his first start, while the D-backs lost 7-1, he was productive, managing 2 hits in his 3 trips to the plate, including scoring their only run of the game from Nick Ahmed's RBI groundout. And by the end of his first 39 games, he was excelling with the bat, posting a solid .331 average. However, the power was lacking, as he only had 1 homer, which came off Ken Giles in his 23rd game of the season, but nonetheless, it was a decent start to his big league career. And the D-backs proved they were keen on giving him a bigger role in the team when they traded away their right fielder Mark Trumbo, who was having a great start to the season with 9 homers in 46 games and an .805 OPS. But by doing so, this allowed Tomás to start in his more comfortable position, as Jake Lamb returned to take third base back just a few days after the Trumbo deal. But we can see a clear dip in production at the point in which he moved to the outfield. As mentioned, he had a stellar .331 average in his first 39 games while playing at third. In fact, that figure ranked as the 7th best in all of baseball at the time, but after moving into the outfield, his average dropped around 100 points to just .244 in his final 79 games of the season, giving him a mediocre final line with 9 home runs, a .273 average, a .707 OPS for an OPS plus of only 88 in 118 games. And on top of this, he barely walked, while striking out a bunch. In fact, his .15 walk to strikeout ratio ranked as the 18th worst mark in all of baseball, which makes it clear that his first season did not live up to the expectations most placed on him entering the year, and there are many reasons as to why this could be the case, but the most glaringly obvious one was the fact that he wasn't pulling the ball. In 2015, there were 211 hitters with at least 400 plate appearances. His pull percentage ranked as the 192nd lowest. And when you aren't pulling the ball, you lose a lot of power, which was a strange tactic to use for a guy like Tomás, whose biggest attribute was his home run power, and could be the main reason why he wasn't able to reach double digits in terms of homers despite coming to the plate a total of 426 times. And when looking on the other side of the ball, he was as bad as you could get defensively. There's one stat I would like to look at called UZR per 150 games. This is a stat that attempts to quantify how many runs a player saved or gave up through their fielding prowess and averages it out over a 150 game sample size. For reference, the best players in 2015 were Kevin Kiermaier, Jason Hayward, and Andrelton Simmons, who all found themselves in the high teens. Now let's look at Tomás. During his time at third base, he recorded a -24 figure, the 3rd worst among third basemen. Then in the outfield, among players who played as many innings as he did, his -16.2 figure ranked as the 2nd lowest, only besting Hanley Ramirez, proving that while the offensive side of his game was manageable, the defense was going to be a problem, with it being the main contributor as to why he posted -1 WAR in his first season. Safe to say, he had a lot to work on entering his 2nd year in the bigs. As mentioned, he needed to pull the ball more in order to tap back into his power potential, and defensively, there were major strides he needed to take. That's why in the offseason, he worked with the club's strength coach Nate Shaw on his first step quickness, and during spring training, he worked with outfield coach Dave McKay, who's optimistic about his defensive ceiling. No, average is out the door. He'll be much better than average. I like to say he's going to be a good outfielder. I think he's doing a really good job. He's certainly getting good grades for his defense. On top of this, he hit .404 in spring training, and despite logging 0 homers in 15 games, he hit 7 doubles, giving hope that his bat would materialize in MLB, and this would be the case. Despite having a similar batting average to the year prior, his 30 doubles and 31 homers allowed his OPS to rise by over 100 points and OPS plus by 20. He also became one of just 20 players to post at least 30 homers and doubles, showing that his power had finally arrived. And this was accomplished by him tapping back into his pull side with a little help from a change in his swing. As you can see, in 2015, he had a huge leg kick and it looked as though it was messing up his timing, but in 2016, he had a smaller movement with his front leg, giving him a more fluid approach and allowing him to get to the ball at a better position than before. All in all, his impressive offensive season yielded him a WAR of -0.9, just 0.1 higher than his previous season's total. The reason, you guessed it, his defense, in terms of outs above average, which is a cumulative effect of all individual plays a fielder has been credited or debited with, he was one of the worst in baseball. But first, for reference, the best outfielders in the game in 2016 were Billy Hamilton and Ender Enciarte at around 20. 20. Tomás, on the other hand, ranked as the second worst at -17, only better than Matt Kemp. It's crazy to think that despite working hard all offseason long with his strength and outfield coaches that he regressed. And his defense was severely hurting his overall game, as his -0.9 figure gave him a total of -1.9 during his first 2 seasons, the 5th worst among field players during that time. But without the ability to change the past, Tomás set out to finally become a contributing member of the D-backs roster in 2017, and to his credit, he was. At the end of April, he already had 14 extra base hits in just 23 games to go along with a .291 average and 900 OPS. But after slumping hard in his next 24 games, hitting just .188, something was off. It was then discovered he had a groin injury, forcing him to go on the injured list. And after multiple attempts to make a return later in the season failed, he underwent surgery to repair the issue, officially ending his season after just 47 games played. At this point, the chatter surrounding his name was starting to trend negatively, with most fans and analysts around the league already calling him a bust and the second coming of Dayan Viciedo. To make matters worse, in January of 2018, Tomás was clocked in going 105 miles per hour on the highway and was charged with reckless driving as well as criminal speeding. Couple this with poor play on the field and you get a player who could become a problem in the clubhouse. And because of this, the Diamondbacks decided to outright him to AAA after not a single team put in a request for him through waivers. But could you blame them? He was owed $46 million over the next 3 years and had yet to post a single positive WAR season. So as mentioned, he went to AAA. Normally a decision like this would impact a player mentally, but instead the D-backs farm director had this to say regarding the assumption that he was discouraged or had a bad attitude. With everything he's gone through in his short career to this point, it'd be easy for him to do all those things. I think people probably expect that, but it couldn't be further from the truth. He's been unbelievable there. But despite this, he was never recalled, and he spent the entire season at AAA, where he put up uninspiring numbers with 11 walks compared to 101 strikeouts, as well as just a .262 average and 745 OPS. And 2019 was much of the same, as he didn't break spring training with a major league team, a shame because I truly wonder what he would have been able to accomplish with the juice balls that season. But I digress, because he was still able to make headlines for his power in the minors. For instance, on May 20th, he hit 4 home runs in the club's 25-8 thrashing over Tacoma. Then during the minor league home run derby, he beat out current MLB players in Mike Ford of the Cincinnati Reds, Jorge Mateo of the Baltimore Orioles, and Ty France, who played 88 games for the Mariners this season before being DFA'd. All of this culminated to the D-backs giving him one final chance at the big league level when they selected his contract on July 26th, with the corresponding move putting Luke Weaver on the 60-day injured list. But after a few pinch hit opportunities and one start at DH, the club decided to outright him back to AAA, where he would spend the rest of the year. And after not getting an opportunity with the club during the abbreviated 2020 season, his 6-year, $68.5 million contract had finally ended. In total, he played 309 games at the big league level, managing 60 doubles and 48 home runs. Not bad power production. But because of his lack of defense, his WAR total of -2.5 ranked as the 4th worst among field players between 2015 to 2019. Which makes it no surprise articles like this one were posted after his contract was off the books. Because maybe he would have been a fine DH for an American League team. After all, he showed glimpses of being one of the most powerful players in all of baseball, with over 60 extra base hits in 2016. But no matter how well he hit, it was impossible to outweigh his horrible defense. In fact, his -2.5 WAR ranks as the worst mark in Diamondbacks history. And in terms of MLB history, he posted the 4th lowest single season WAR total in a 30-homer season. And as for the D-backs, it severely hurt their ability to be a contender. For example, they already had major money tied up in Zach Greinke, who signed the highest annual value contract at just over $34 million over 6 years. And of course, Tomás's contract wasn't cheap either. For a mid-market team, they weren't able to hand these types of contracts out to everybody, which meant they were not able to retain their 2017 deadline acquisition in JD Martinez, despite him having a tremendous last few months with the club, helping them to their first playoff series victory in a decade. Also, Paul Goldschmidt, the player you think of when referring to the D-backs teams of the 2010s, was traded heading into the 2019 season because they didn't have the capital to retain him. But Tomás wasn't going to let his disappointing D-back spell deter him from playing the game he loved, so in hopes of once again playing in MLB, he signed a minor league deal with the Washington Nationals ahead of the 2021 season. But after hitting 185 in 26 games within the organization, he was released at the end of the year. So off he went to the Mexican Pacific Winter League, where in his first season he won the MVP award, managing 27 extra base hits in 66 games to go along with a 328 average and 893 OPS. And despite regressing the following season with his OPS dropping a considerable amount, he will once again be playing in Mexico this winter. So while his heavily anticipated MLB career may not have gone the way he or the Diamondbacks presumed, he's still playing the game he loves. Like he said, he would rather play baseball for little money than not play the game at all.